backing vocals. Now, backing vocals is one of the biggest subjects there is because it involves a lot of music theory and also a lot of arrangement. But I do want to talk about some of the things that I'm thinking about when I'm making all the parts for the backing vocals. And I want to start with something called counterpoint. Now, counterpoint is a theory that talks about voices being independent of each other and going with their own kind of movement and direction, which eventually creates to a much richer texture and to a much more interesting musical language for me. So what is counterpoint? Let's say I have a basic line like C, D, and E. Very simple line. Now, a standard backing vocals or a standard second voice might be something like E, F, and G. And those two will sound very nice together, but they also sound like one unit. You don't really hear each of the voices individually. And one of the things we do to separate them from each other is to change the direction of each of the voices. So if we have an ascending voice like this C, D, and E one we had, we can do a second one which will be something more like C, B, and A, which together will sound something like this. And that kind of a combination creates to a more separated voices and thus to a richer sound when they're combined together. So that's the general idea behind counterpoint. But the main question is, how do we make this sound good? And the answer is, or at least one of the answers is, what we want to do is look for the intervals between each of the voices to themselves and look for consonants and nice intervals that we're looking for. So for example, usually we would be looking for something like a third or a sixth because these are very consonant and nice sounding intervals. So for example, in the case of that really basic line we just had before, which is the C, D, and E, a nice backing vocals for this in the counterpoint way would be E, B, and G. Because if you look into it, we're first going to see that we have a third here, we're going to have a sixth here, and then a third here. Now this also works because the direction of the second line is different from the direction of the first line. The first line goes up 2 steps. And the second line goes up a fifth and then goes down a third. So this creates two voices which are very separate from each other, yet still creates the intervals we're looking for, which are the third and sixth, but also create independability and are independent from one another. Another element we want to consider is the distance between one note to another. If one voice is moving in smaller steps, the other voice can go in larger steps or even jump in bigger distances. So for example, if this note is going C, D, and E, and the other note is going, for example, C, F, and G, you'd hear a big difference between the two. They still remain independent because those leaps are very big and very different from those of the second voice. Now, these are some of the basic ideas behind the counterpoint techniques, which are fundamental for creating backing vocals. In the next lesson, I'm going to talk about how to incorporate these techniques into harmony using target notes.